Hello visionaries, it's StacyLynn and it is day 10 of my 90-day video challenge. A few days back I had mentioned that I am reconnecting with my personal creativity, that I'm an artist, and I have noticed recently in my business pursuits that I have begun to neglect my day-to-day creativity, my artistry. And I decided that it was time to reconnect with that on a very purposeful level. So I've decided to reread The Artist's Way. It's a book by Julian Cameron that is really great for discovering or rediscovering your inner creativity, no matter what your pursuits in life are. Anyway, so I wanted to read the introduction to this book, and I've decided that I'm going to split it up into two videos because about halfway through I'm already way over the time frame that I would like for these videos, and these next two videos will be about 12 or 15 minutes apiece. And I promise after that they won't be so long. When I go through the weekly lessons, I will condense and try and keep it under 5 minutes. But if you do sit through and listen, trust me, there is so much inspiration and so much wonderful tidbits in this, and I would really appreciate any feedback you have. And it's a great way to get an introduction to the idea of the book if you've never read it or been exposed to it before. She's a really amazing writer, and I cried the first time I read this introduction, so if that gives you an indication. So today I'm just going to read through part of it, and tomorrow I will finish it and probably give you a little bit of background on my artistic adventures so far. So here we go. Introduction to the 10th Anniversary Edition of The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. A course in discovering and rediscovering your creative self. Art is a spiritual transaction. Artists are visionaries. We routinely practice a form of faith, seeing clearly and moving toward a creative goal that shimmers in the distance, often visible to us, but invisible to those around us. Difficult as it is to remember, it is our work that creates the market, not the market that creates our work. Art is an act of faith, and we practice practicing it. Sometimes we are called on pilgrimages on its behalf, and like many pilgrims, we doubt the call even as we answer it, but answer we do. I'm writing on a black lacquer Chinese desk that looks west across the Hudson River to America. I am on the far western shore of Manhattan, which is a country unto itself, and the one I am living in right now, working to cantilever musicals from page to stage. Manhattan is where the singers are, not to mention Broadway. I'm here because art brought me. Obedient I came. Per capita, Manhattan may have a higher density of artists than anywhere else in America. In my Upper West Side neighborhood, cellos are as frequent and as ungainly as cows in Iowa. They are part of the landscape here. Writing at a typewriter, looking out across the lights, I too am something Manhattan knows very well. I write melody on a piano 10 blocks from where Richard Rogers, a gangly adolescent, climbed a short stoop to meet a short boy who became his longtime partner, Larry Hart. Together they dreamed through drought and flood. My apartment is on Riverside Drive. At this narrow end of the island, Broadway is a scant block behind my back as I face west across the river, inky black now as the sun sets in the colored ribbons above it. It is a wide river, not only dark, and on the windy days, and there are many, the water is choppy and white-capped. Cherry red tugboats, as determined as beetles, push their prows into the waves, digging their way up and down the river, pushing long barges with their snouts. Manhattan is a seaport and a landing for dreams. Manhattan teems with dreamers. All artists dream, and we arrive here carrying those dreams. Not all of us are dressed in black, still smoking cigarettes and drinking hard liquor, still living out of the tawdry romance of hard knocks in tiny walk-ups filled with hopes and the roaches in neighborhoods so bad that the rats have moved on. No, just like the roaches, artists are everywhere here. In tenements to penthouses, and my own building has not only me and my piano with typewriter, but also an opera singer who trills in the inner canyons like a lark ascending. The neighborhood waiters are often, not always, actors, and the particularly pretty duck-footed neighborhood girls do dance, although you wouldn't imagine their grace from their web-footed walks. I drank a cup of tea at Edgar's Cafe this afternoon, the cafe named for Edgar Allan Poe, who lived down here and died farther uptown, all the way in the Bronx. I've looked up into Leonard Bernstein's ground floor windows at the Dakota and got a little numb each time I passed the archway where John Lennon was shot. In the apartment, I am a scant block from Duke Ellington's haunts, and there's a street named after him, too. Manhattan is a town full of ghosts. Creative power and powers course through its vertical canyons. It was in Manhattan that I first began teaching the artist's way. Like all artists, like all of us if we listen, I experienced inspiration. I was called to teach, and I answered that call somewhat grudgingly. What about my art, I wondered. I had not yet learned that we tend to practice what we preach, that in unblocking others, I would unblock myself, and that, like all artists, I would thrive more easily with some companionship, with kindred souls, making leaps of faith. Called to teach, I could not imagine the good teaching would bring to me, through me, to others. In 1978, I began teaching artists how to unblock and get back on their feet after creative injury. I shared with them the tools I had learned through my own creative practice. I kept it all easy and as gentle as I could. Remember, I said, there is creative energy that wants to express itself through you. Don't judge the work or yourself. You can sort it out later. Let God work through you, I told them. My tools were simple and my students were few, but tools and numbers of students grew steadily and hugely for the next 10 years. At the beginning, and for the most part always, my students were chiefly blocked or injured artists, painters, poets, potters, writers, filmmakers, actors, and those who simply wished to be anything more creative in their personal lives, or in any of the arts. I kept things simple because they really were. Creativity is like crabgrass. It springs back with the smallest bit of care. I taught people how to bring their creative spirit, the simple nutrients and nurturants they needed to keep it fed. People responded by making books, films, paintings, photographs, and much, much more. Word of mouth spread, and my classes were easy to fill. In the meantime, I kept making my own art. I wrote plays, I wrote novels and movies. I did feature films, TV, and short stories. I wrote poetry, then performance art. From doing this work, I learned more creative tools, wrote more teaching essays, and at an urging of my friend Mark Bryan, I got the essays assembled into teaching notes and then into a proper book. Mark and I stood elbow to elbow, printing and assembling this simple book that I could send out to people needing help. We mailed it in this form to perhaps 1,000 people who in turn photocopied and passed it on to their friends. We began to hear amazing stories of recovery, painters painting, actors acting, directors directing, and people with no declared art who began doing their art form they had always wished to do. We heard tales of sudden breakthroughs and slow awakenings. Jeremy P. Tarcher, the noted creativity and human potential publisher, read an early draft of the work and decided to publish it. Meanwhile, I divided the book into a 12-week course, each section dealing with some specific issue. This simple book with a distillate of 12 years of teaching and 20 years of making art in many forms. At first, I called it Healing the Artist Within. Finally, after much thought, I decided to call it The Artist's Way. It explained and explored creativity as a spiritual issue. I began to witness my own miracles. I often traveled to teach, and at book signings and public venues, people began to hand me CDs, books, videos, and letters conveying this thought: I used your tools and made this. Thank you so much. My most frequent compliment: your book changed my life. And I heard it from artists of little fame and great fame in backwaters and on international front lines. Using the tools, painters went from being blocked to winning large juried exhibits. Writers went from not writing to winning Emmy and Grammy awards for their work. I found myself humbled by the power of God, the great Creator, to restore strength, vitality, and inspiration to individual creative paths, diverse and divergent. One woman, a blocked writer in her mid-50s, became an award-winning playwright. A long-time sideman conceived and executed a bravado solo album. Long-harbored dreams bloomed everywhere, where the great Creator turned a gardening hand. I received thank yous that probably belonged to God. I was a spiritual conduit for the central spiritual fact that the great Creator loved other artists and actively helped those who opened themselves to their creativity. Artist to artist, hand to hand, the artist's way began to spread. I heard about groups in the Panama jungle, in the outback, and in the other heart of darkness, the New York Times. Druid groups, Sufi groups, and Buddhist groups all found common ground in its simple creative precepts. The artist's way reached the internet, forming groups, or, as I call them, clusters, that were like large melon patches sending feeders and tendrils out to form now a group in England, now a group in Germany, now a Swiss Union contingent. Like life itself, the artist's way, which began to be called a movement, did indeed move onward tenaciously, and even voraciously. Artists helping other artists proliferated. Works of art blossomed, and careers took off and steadied, surrounded by supportive friends. I was a willing witness. I will continue this tomorrow, and I will try not to cry. It touches me. It speaks to me. And it may speak to you. And if it does, even if you don't consider yourself an artist, if it speaks to you, you are a creative. Even if your everyday pursuits are in the intellectual side of life. So hang on to that. Don't lose it. It's important. And I will continue with this tomorrow. Have a great day. Thank you for watching. If you're interested in knowing why I'm making these videos and what I'm doing these days, click on one of the links below to connect with me, and I would love to share it with you. Hopefully you'll tune in tomorrow to hear how the introduction ends and how I'll be setting up the rest of the videos that have to do with The Artist's Way by Julian Cameron. You guys have a great night. Take care. Bye.